I came to collect your late husband's debt.
I can't pay you in money, but I can offer you something worth more.
I came to collect her late husband's debt. $47,000, 11 pages in a folder, a job I'd done 1,000 times without feeling a thing. But the widow standing on the porch didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't slam the door in my face like they always do. She looked me dead in the eyes, this woman who'd buried her husband only 9 months before, and she said the words that would unravel everything I thought I knew about debt, about loss, about myself. I can't pay you in money, but I can offer you something worth more. I was a hardened man, a debt collector who'd buried his own faith, his own marriage, his own daughter's voice somewhere down a long gray road I couldn't find my way back from. I knocked on that door to take something from Margaret Whitfield, but what she offered me on that porch, over sweet potato biscuits and a dead man's journal and a prayer, she whispered when she thought I wasn't listening, was worth more than every dollar I'd ever collected in 11 cold years. So what does a grieving widow with empty pockets have that's worth more than $47,000? Why did the man sent to ruin her end up the one being saved? And what was written in her late husband's journal that brought a faithless man to his knees? Stay with me, because if you look away now, you'll miss the moment everything changed. My name is Nathaniel Calloway, and that gray Tuesday in October I almost didn't go. The folder sat on my passenger seat the whole drive out of Nashville. 40 minutes of fields turning orange, churches with cracked signs, gas stations selling boiled peanuts. I didn't see any of it. I'd learned a long time ago not to look too hard at the world. Looking too hard is how you start to feel things, and feeling things, in my line of work, gets you fired. 11 years I'd done this. 11 years of knocking on doors and watching people fall apart. I used to be a different man, a history teacher, a husband, a father who coached baseball on Fridays and sang in the church choir on Sundays. Then the dog died. Then the marriage cracked. Then my daughter Becca stopped picking up the phone. And somewhere in all that breaking, I set my heart down on the side of the road and just kept driving. So when I turned onto Clover Hill Road and saw that little white house with the green roof and the flower beds someone still cared enough to tend, I felt nothing. That's what I told myself anyway. I parked on the gravel, straightened my jacket, grabbed the folder, and I sat there 1 second too long, staring at a porch swing that wasn't moving, and a welcome mat that read "As for me and my house" in letters worn soft by years of feet. Then I walked up those 3 steps and I knocked. The woman who opened the door wasn't what I expected. I don't know what I expected. Tears, maybe. A robe and red eyes. Someone already broken so I wouldn't have to do the breaking. Instead, Margaret Whitfield stood there in jeans and a cream sweater, barefoot, her brown hair slipping loose around a face that was calm in a way that didn't make sense. She had eyes that had cried an ocean and come out the other side carrying something I didn't have a word for. She looked at my jacket, my lanyard, the folder in my hand, and she knew. I watched her understand exactly who I was and why I'd come. But she didn't flinch. "Mr. she said. "Calloway from Hargrove and Associates." I kept my voice flat, professional, the voice I'd built like a wall. "I'm sorry to come unannounced, Mrs. Whitfield. I'm here about a debt under your late husband's." "I know what you're here about," she said. Soft, steady, and then she stepped out onto that porch, pulled the door half closed behind her, and asked me a question that no one in 11 years had ever asked me. "Have you eaten breakfast?" I just stared at her. "I made biscuits this morning," she went on, like we were old friends. "Sweet potato with honey butter. There's coffee too, the real kind." She paused, and something in her eyes steadied right onto mine. "I can't pay you in money, Mr. Calloway. I want to be honest about that from the start. But I can offer you something worth more, if you'll let me." I opened my mouth to say no. I had 7 other doors to knock on, a quota, a boss who counted my hours like a hawk, but I heard myself say yes. And God help me. I had no idea what I'd just walked into. The kitchen smelled like wood smoke and cinnamon, and something else I couldn't name right. Then it hit me. It smelled like a home, not a house. A home, the kind of smell that reaches past your adult brain and grabs you somewhere. Younger, somewhere you forgot you used to live. I sat down at a round oak table near a window that looked out over a small backyard garden, neat, mulched for winter. A little red barn bird feeder swinging on a shepherd's hook in the morning stillness. And I remember thinking, this woman just lost her husband 9 months ago. She could have let everything go to weeds, but she didn't. She was still tending things, still planting, still believing something would come up in spring. I didn't know yet that I was one of those things. Maggie set a plate in front of me without asking. 2 biscuits golden brown, already split open. Honey butter melting down the sides in slow amber ribbons, coffee dark and strong. A small cream pitcher placed beside the mug like a quiet act of dignity. "You don't have to do this," I said. "I know," she replied, sitting down across from me with her own cup. "I'm doing it anyway." I took a bite of that biscuit and something happened in my face that I couldn't stop. 11 years of professional distance just slipped, just for a second, but she saw it. "Those are remarkable," I said, and I was surprised by how human my own voice sounded. "Thomas's grandmother's recipe," she said, and the way she said his name, Thomas, it didn't break, it softened, like touching something precious without squeezing too hard. "He made them every Saturday morning. I couldn't touch that recipe for 6 months after he passed." She paused. Then one morning something said, "Make the biscuits, Maggie." So I did. I set my coffee down. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said. I'd said those words hundreds of times, but this time they came out different. They came out like I meant them, 'cause I did. She looked at me across that table, and then she asked me something that no client, no debtor, no person on the other side of my folder had ever asked. "How long have you been doing this job?" 11 years, I said. "Do you like it?" The question landed in that kitchen, like a stone dropped into still water. I opened my mouth, closed it again. "It pays well," I finally said. She nodded slowly, like she'd expected exactly that answer and wasn't going to judge me for it. "What did you do before?" And here is where it gets dangerous, because I told her. I don't know why I told her. Maybe it was the biscuits. Maybe it was those eyes. Maybe it was the fact that she asked like she actually wanted to know. "I taught history," I said. "High school." Her whole face lit up. "What was your favorite period to teach?" And before my professional armor could reassemble itself, I said, "The civil rights movement." Every single time. Because I loved watching teenagers realize that ordinary people changed the world. Not superheroes, not presidents, just people who got tired of being afraid. Maggie Whitfield looked at me from across that oak hills, and she said 4 words that hit me somewhere so deep I felt them in my chest for days afterward. "That is still you." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just looked down at my coffee mug and turned it slowly in my hands, like a man holding the wreckage of something he used to recognize. She told me about Thomas then, not with grief, with love. Like he'd stepped out for groceries and she was just keeping his seat warm. Thomas Allen Whitfield, high school football coach, church deacon, the kind of man who left encouraging notes in his wife's coat pockets for her to find in February. Also, terrible with money. Not because he was irresponsible, because he believed in people more than they believed in themselves. He'd co-signed a business loan for a cousin whose restaurant closed 18 months later. And the remaining $47,000 had landed like a stone on the woman, now sitting across from me in bare feet. "He knew it was a risk when he signed," she said simply. "It cost you," I said. "It cost us," she corrected, soft but certain. "But I'm not angry at him for it. You can't spend your remaining years being angry at someone who spent his whole life loving you." That sentence went through me like a current. Because I was angry, at my ex-wife, at God, at the silence where my daughter's voice used to be. I'd been angry for so long it had calcified into numbness, and I'd mistaken the numbness for strength. Then she said something that made the hair on my arms rise. "I'll pray for your daughter." She said it the way someone says I'll pick up milk on the way home. No fanfare, no pity. Like it was simply a thing she intended to do, and fully expected to produce results. I almost said don't bother. I almost said something cold about prayer being a nice idea for people who hadn't been ignored by God for a decade. But I looked at her face and I couldn't do it. I stood to leave, gathered my folder, tried to remember what I'd come here to do. "Mr. Calloway," she says, rushing too. I turned. I meant what I said on the porch. I'd like to explain it properly, what I meant by something worth more. "Will you come back?" "I don't usually make repeat visits," I said. "Maggie," she corrected quietly. "And I know you don't." She tilted her head, just slightly. "But I think you will." I drove back to Nashville with the radio off and the window cracked and the smell of those biscuits still, somehow in my truck, and I did something I hadn't done in years. I filed a 30-day deferment on her account and called it cooperative resolution. Gerald Hargrove Jr. barely looked up from his desk. I went back the following Thursday. I told myself it was professional. I brought a revised payment schedule. I wore my jacket and my expression. But the truth I wasn't ready to say out loud yet, was that Maggie Whitfield's kitchen was the only place in 11 years where the noise inside my head had gone completely quiet, and this time when she met me on the porch, she was holding something. A book, dark brown leather, worn soft at the corners, a small brass clasp left open like it was already waiting to be read. "I told you I had something worth more than money," she said, and she held it out to me with both hands. "This is part of it." I took it. Inside the cover, in a man's careful handwriting, Thomas Allen Whitfield, his thoughts, his prayers, his debts to God. His journal, she said. He kept one every year for 20 years. This was the last one. She paused, and something moved through those steady brown eyes. "I've been praying about who needs this right now, and I keep hearing your name." She left me on that porch swing alone with the journal and went inside, and I opened it. Thomas Whitfield's words were not the words of a perfect man. They were the words of a real one, a man who failed and doubted and circled back. He wrote about his early years of marriage with the honesty of someone who'd learned the hard way. He wrote about the loan with a wry, rueful clarity. He wrote about faith not as something he had mastered, but as something he chose every single morning, even when it cost him. And then I turned to an entry dated October 3rd, 14 months before Thomas died, and I stopped breathing. I've been thinking about men who are sealed, not bad men, just sealed like a jar turned too tight. I used to judge those men, now I pray for them, because I have been that man. After we lost our baby in 2003, I went sealed for 2 years, and Maggie just kept feeding me, kept praying over me, kept leaving notes in my coat pockets. I don't know how she knew that love, when it is quiet, persistent, and asks nothing back, is the only thing powerful enough to open a sealed thing without destroying it. I thank God every day that he knew I needed her before I knew it myself. I read that paragraph 4 times. 4 times. When Maggie came back out with 2 glasses of sweet tea, I was sitting completely still, staring at nothing, or maybe at everything. She sat in the rocking chair beside the swing, and she didn't say a word. She just let the silence be what it was. Finally I said, "He loved you very well." "He learned how," she said quietly. "So did I. It took us some years, but we got there." I turned to look at her. "How did you not fall apart when he died?" She looked at me with the softest expression I'd ever seen on a human face. "Who told you I didn't?" And then she told me. 4 months barely getting out of bed before noon, burning everything she cooked, letting the garden go to weeds, crying in the grocery store, in the car, in the middle of the church choir so openly that Darlene Patterson still brought her a casserole every other week out of pure concern. "I fell apart thoroughly, Nate," she said, and it was the first time she called me Nate. I just didn't fall apart alone, and eventually, the pieces showed me a new shape. I looked at this woman, this barefoot, biscuit-making, journal-keeping, praying widow sitting on a firm porch with a man who'd come to take from her. And something cracked open in me that I hadn't felt crack in a very long time. Not love, not yet, but the thing that comes just before love. The terrifying realization that someone sees you. Not the jacket, not the folder, not the professional distance. You, the seals thing inside the jar, and they're not afraid of it. I drove home that evening on that dark country road, and I heard myself say something out loud, quietly, to no one in particular. Or maybe to someone I'd stopped believing was still there. I don't know what I'm doing, but I think you might. It wasn't a prayer exactly. It was the beginning of one. November came to Clover Hill Road the way grace comes, quietly without announcement, slipping in through the cracks before you even realized the door was open. I kept coming back, every Thursday, then Thursdays and Saturdays. Then some Tuesdays just because the week felt too long without that porch, that swing, that kitchen that smelled like wood smoke, and something I was only beginning to recognize as belonging. I had stopped bringing the folder. I'm not sure exactly when it happened. Somewhere between the second and third visit, between her fried chicken and a conversation about Becca that lasted 2 hours without either of us noticing, between one journal entry and the next, the professional pretense had just dissolved, like salt in warm water, quietly, completely. And what was left underneath? What was left when you stripped away 11 years of armor and quotas and emotional distance was a man I had almost forgotten existed. Maggie saw him before I did. She always saw things before I did. She showed me the garden on a Saturday afternoon, walking me through the dormant beds like a woman introducing me to people she loved. "These are the tulip bulbs I planted in October, red and gold. They'll come up in April. These peonies Thomas gave me for our 20th anniversary. And this," she touched the dry stems of the lavender in the side bed, "this comes back every year without me doing a single thing. Like it just decides to keep its promise no matter what." I stood there in that quiet garden, listening to her talk about things that were sleeping, underground but not dead, and something in me understood exactly what she was describing without her saying my name. She taught me to make the biscuits one rainy Saturday in December. I was a terrible student. My first batch came out dense as concrete. She stood beside me at that counter laughing, a real, completely unguarded laugh, and something about the sound of it unlocked something in my chest so suddenly that I stopped mid-law myself and pressed my hand flat against my sternum like a man checking for a pulse. It was there, still there, warm and alive and closer to the surface than it had been in years. She noticed. She always noticed. But she didn't make a production of it. She just handed me the honey butter and said, "Try again." That was Maggie Whitfield. She never pushed. She never performed. She just kept showing up, kept feeding people, kept praying, kept tending things, and trusted that love, when it is quiet and persistent and asks nothing back, does its own work in its own time. And then December 3rd happened, and everything changed. I was under her Christmas tree adjusting the stand. Pine needles in my hair, knees on the hardwood floor, the whole living room smelling like a forest. She came in from the kitchen, carrying 2 mugs of hot cocoa, and she stopped in the doorway. She just stopped. And I looked up and saw her face. She was looking at the tree, at the lights, at me on the floor, at the ordinary beautiful lifeness of the scene, and her eyes filled. Not collapsed, just filled. The way a cup fills when it finally gets what it's been empty of for too long. She set the mugs down fast and pressed her fingers to her mouth. I got up off that floor. I walked over to her, and I did something that surprised both of us. I reached out and I placed my hand gently over hers, the one pressed against her mouth, and I just held it there, steady, present, like a man who had finally stopped running. "You're allowed to miss him," I said, "especially now." She looked up at me, and what I saw in her eyes in that moment, grief and warmth and something new and terrifying and beautiful all braided together, did something to my chest I have no clinical words for. "I do miss him," she whispered, "and I also." She stopped herself. "What?" I said. She lowered her hands slowly and she let me see her face. All of it. The tears, the warmth, the honest confusion of a woman who had loved deeply, lost completely, and was now standing at the edge of something she hadn't planned for, and wasn't sure she had permission to want. "I feel something I wasn't expecting to feel again," she said, "and I don't quite know what to do with it." I stood there in that pine-scented living room with my hand still over hers, and I made a decision, not with my head. With everything underneath my head, everything that Clover Hill Road had been slowly excavating since October. "I don't either," I said, "but I'm not afraid of it anymore." Her eyes searched mine. "Nate, I need to be slow. Thomas hasn't been gone a year and Maggie." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I am not going anywhere." I held her gaze because she deserved to be looked at while I said this. "I have spent 11 years moving through my own life at a dead sprint with my eyes on the ground, and I have missed everything worth stopping for. I want to stop here, with you. No pressure, no rush, just this, whatever this is, for as long as you'll have me." She looked at me for a long moment, this woman who had offered a stranger biscuits instead of a slammed door, who had prayed over a man she barely knew because something told her he needed it, who had handed me her dead husband's journal because she trusted that God knew what he was doing, even when nobody else did. She picked up one of the mugs and handed it to me. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay," I said. The corner of her mouth rose. "Now help me with the ornaments." And I smiled. Not the professional smile, not the polite one, the real one. The one Becca used to say could light up a baseball field. The one I thought I'd lost somewhere on the road between who I was and who I'd become. It was back. The call from Becca came on a Wednesday night 3 weeks later. I was sitting in my truck outside my apartment when my phone lit up with her name. My stomach did what it always did, tightened, braced, got ready for voicemail. But this time she picked up on my end. "Wait," I picked up, and she was already talking. "Dad." Her voice was tight in the way of someone who'd been holding something heavy for too long and had finally decided to set it down. "I need to talk to you." She was drowning in her pre-med program. Not academically, Becca was brilliant, always had been, but emotionally. The pressure was a living thing crushing her from the inside, and she'd been too proud to say it, too estranged from me to call. So she'd held it alone until alone wasn't enough anymore. "Becca," I said, and my voice cracked right down the middle. "I'm so sorry I haven't been. Dad, don't apologize yet." A shaky breath. "Just listen, please just listen." So I listened. For the first time in 4 years, I sat in the dark in my truck outside my apartment, and I listened to my daughter, really listened, without preparing my response, without defending myself, without the wall, for a full hour. I heard everything she'd been carrying, everything she'd needed to say to me and hadn't known how, Everything that distance and pride and my own emotional absence had cost us both. And when she finally said quietly, "Can we have dinner? Can we actually just sit down, Dad?" My answer came from somewhere so deep and so healed it didn't even hesitate. "Yes, name the day. I will drive to you." I hung up and I sat there in the dark for a long moment. Then I called Maggie. She answered on the second ring. "She called," I said. And I didn't even try to hide what was in my voice. All of it. The relief, the gratitude, the 20 years of parental love that had been locked behind a door, finally swinging wide open. There was a brief, warm silence on the line. And then Maggie said softly, "I know. You know? I've been praying for that call every single morning for 6 weeks, Nate. And I knew it was coming. I could feel it." A pause and her voice dropped even lower. "How are you?" I stopped, swallowed, started again. "I'm grateful," I said. And I meant it in every direction at once. For Becca, for this woman on the phone, for the gravel driveway I'd turned into on a gray October morning, looking to take something and instead found everything. "Nate," she said. "Yeah, thank God." I leaned my head back against the seat, closed my eyes. The Nashville night was quiet around me and the stars were doing what stars do, holding their positions faithful, unhurried, present. And I thanked God, out loud, in my truck, like a man who had walked back through a door he thought was closed forever, and found the lights still on inside. Spring came back to Clover Hill Road the way it always does, insistently, tenderly, without asking permission. The tulip bulbs Maggie had planted in October came up in a long row of red and gold along the front porch, exactly like she said they would. The peonies Thomas had given her for their 20th anniversary bloomed fat and pink beside the garden gate, and the lavender, just like she promised, came back in the sidebed without being asked. Like a vow kept, like something that had simply decided it was not finished yet. Nate was there to see all of it. He had, somewhere in the long, beautiful winter of Clover Hill Road, done the bravest thing a broken man can do. He had resigned from Hargrove and Associates, left the manila folders and the official lanyard and 11 years of emotional soul concrete behind without looking back. And on a Thursday morning in February, on something that felt like equal parts faith and recklessness, he had called the principal of Maplewood High School and asked whether they needed a history teacher. They did. Starting in September, he told Maggie over biscuits, the good batch, the ones he'd finally gotten right, and she looked at him from across that oak table with those steady brown eyes and said just 3 words. "There he is." "Who?" he said. "The man," she said, "who loves teaching because ordinary people change the world." He had to look away, not because it hurt, because it was true. The debt, all $47,000 of it, was settled in March, not by Maggie. The deacon board of her church organized a community fundraiser after the quiet, strategic prayers of one Dorothy Simmons reached the right ears. They raised $31,000 in a single weekend, and a lawyer in Nashville, a former player of Thomas Whitfield's who credited Coach Whitfield for keeping him off the streets, covered the rest, anonymously. When Nate found out, he sat down in Maggie's kitchen and put his face in his hands, just sat there. "Nate," she said softly. He lifted his head, and the expression on his face, undone, rebuilt, completely and wholly alive, was one Maggie Whitfield would carry in her heart for the rest of her life. "I came here," he said, voices rough, "to collect a debt, I know." And instead, he stopped. He pressed his fist gently against his chest. "Everything I'd lost is coming back, Maggie. My daughter, my purpose, my breath, my faith. I talked to God last night, really talked. And this time, something was there, something answered." She reached across the table and took both his hands in hers. "He was always there," she said gently. "He was just working in the seams, in the places you couldn't see from where you were standing." Becca came to Maplewood for Easter weekend. She was cautious at first, the particular caution of a daughter who loves her father and has been hurt enough to be careful. But Maggie met her on the porch with biscuits and coffee and zero agenda, and by Sunday afternoon, Becca was on her knees in the garden, learning the names of springs and telling Maggie things she hadn't told her own roommate. Driving back to Nashville that evening, Becca called her father. "Dad." "Yeah, sweetheart." A pause. Then, "She's really good." He was quiet for a moment, watching the country road unspool ahead of him in the fading light. "Yeah," he said, "she really is." "You're happy," Becca said. "Not a question. A discovery. The kind you make when you find something you'd given up looking for." "I am," he said. "For the first time in a long time, Becca. I genuinely, completely am." She was quiet for a moment, then softly, "I'm glad, Dad." And he cried. Right there in the car on the highway. Not the kind of crying that breaks you, the kind that finishes something. The kind that washes a window clean so you can finally see through it again. There is a porch swing on Clover Hill Road. On summer evenings when the fireflies begin their slow scattered illumination over the garden and the copper penny wind chimes turn in the warm Tennessee breeze, two people sit there. She is reading, bare feet tucked beneath her. He is watching the light change, one arm stretched along the back of the swing. Comfortable in the silence, the way only people who have come through hard things together can be. They are not in a hurry. They have both learned, separately, expensively, beautifully. What happens when you sprint through your own life with your eyes down? You miss everything worth stopping for. Inside on the kitchen table is Thomas Whitfield's journal, open to the very last entry he ever wrote, January 10th, 4 days before his heart gave out. I have been thinking about my life and all its strange, grace-filled detours, the loan I shouldn't have signed, the baby we lost, the years Maggie and I fumbled toward each other in the dark before we found the light. I used to think my mistakes were simply mistakes, debts to regret, damage to manage. Now I think they were something else entirely. I think God uses the broken places. I think He sends people into each other's stories at exactly the moment the story needs them. I don't always understand His timing. I have stopped pretending I do. I only know that love, the real kind, the kind that costs something, leaves no one unchanged. Not the giver, not the receiver, not the stranger on the porch. Not the man who might one day read these words and find in them what he could not find anywhere else. Permission to begin again. Be brave, be kind. Make the biscuits. Thomas outside on the swing, Maggie laughs at something Nate says, a real laugh. The kind that carries across a garden and lifts into the evening air like something set free. He looks at her the way Thomas Whitfield once looked at her. Like a man who knows exactly how fortunate he is, and intends never, not for a single day, to forget it. The fireflies rise, the wind chimes turn, and the man who came to collect a debt sits on a porch in Tennessee, richer than he has ever been in his life. Not because of anything he earned, but because of everything he was given when he finally stopped running long enough to receive it. God doesn't always send rescue the way we expect it. Sometimes He sends it barefoot, standing on a porch, holding a plate of sweet potato biscuits, and saying, I can't pay you in money, but I can offer you something worth more. He makes all things beautiful in its time. Ecclesiastes 3:11. Now before you go, I need to ask you something, and I want you to sit with it for a moment. Is there someone in your life right now? Someone you've written off, pulled away from, or stopped believing in, who might just be standing on their own porch, holding something worth more than you ever expected, waiting for you to stop long enough to receive it?